If you enjoyed this audiobook, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1: The People Pleaser's Confession, Part 1: The Nice Person Trap. Sarah had been working at the marketing firm for 3 years when she realized something terrifying. She had no idea what her actual job description was. She stayed late every Tuesday to help Tom with his spreadsheets, covered weekend shifts when anyone asked, and somehow became the unofficial office therapist. When her manager praised her as the one who never says no, Sarah felt a familiar mix of pride and exhaustion that she couldn't quite explain. This is the nice person trap, and it catches more people than you might think. We learned early that being good means being helpful. Your kindergarten teacher probably gave you gold stars for sharing. Your parents beamed when you let your little brother have the bigger cookie. Society sends a clear message. Nice people sacrifice for others, and selfish people think of themselves first. But here's what nobody tells you about this equation. The difference between genuine kindness and compulsive people-pleasing isn't about the action itself. It's about what drives it. When psychologist Dr. Harriet Breaker studied chronic people-pleasers, she found something surprising. Most weren't motivated by generosity at all. They were motivated by fear. Real kindness comes from choice. You help your friend move because you genuinely want to support them. Compulsive people-pleasing comes from terror. You help your friend move because you're scared they'll think you're selfish if you don't. The first feels good. The second feels heavy. Consider Maria, a nurse who worked double shifts whenever colleagues called in sick. She told herself she was being caring, but late at night she'd lie awake feeling angry and used. The anger confused her. Wasn't she doing the right thing? The problem wasn't her kindness. It was that her yes came from fear of disappointing people rather than genuine desire to help. Dr. Aziz Ghazipura's research on people-pleasing reveals a cruel irony. The nicer you are without boundaries, the less people respect you. They don't see your constant availability as kindness. They see it as weakness. Worse yet, you start to disappear. Your personality becomes a collection of what other people need rather than who you actually are. The trap tightens because each yes makes the next one harder to avoid. You become known as the reliable one, the helpful one, the one who never complains. Your reputation depends on self-sacrifice, and changing feels like betraying everyone's expectations. But boundaries aren't the opposite of kindness. They're what make real kindness possible. Without them, every smile becomes performance, and every relationship becomes a transaction you're losing. Part 2: Where you learn to disappear. Think about your earliest memory of being told you were too much. That moment changed how you show up in the world forever. Your childhood home was your first classroom for boundaries, though nobody called them that. You learned unspoken rules about what was safe to want, to feel, to ask for. These lessons came through glances and sighs, through which emotions got attention and which got ignored, through what happened when you said no to a parent having a rough day. Dr. Lindsay Gibson's research on emotionally immature parents shows how children adapt by becoming whatever keeps the peace. Sarah, a marketing executive, grew up with a mother who needed constant emotional support after her father left. By age 8, Sarah was making her own breakfast and listening to her mom cry about work problems. "I learned that my job was to make everyone feel better," she told me. Asking for help felt selfish. These early experiences create what therapists call your boundary blueprint. It works like invisible software running in the background of your adult relationships. You might recognize yourself in common childhood roles: the family peacekeeper who learned conflict was dangerous, the parentified child who grew up too fast, the golden child who discovered love was conditional on perfect behavior, or the invisible kid who learned that having needs meant being a burden. Consider Jake, who spent his childhood tiptoeing around his father's unpredictable moods. Loud laughter meant getting screamed at. Crying meant being told to toughen up. He learned to read every room, to shrink himself, to anticipate everyone else's emotional weather. Today, at 35, he still apologizes for taking up space in meetings. The most painful realization is that your inability to say no was actually brilliant survival programming. Children are hardwired to do whatever maintains their connection to caregivers. If being agreeable kept you safe, if suppressing anger kept you love, if becoming invisible prevented punishment, then your boundary struggles make perfect sense. This programming runs so deep that most people cannot see it. You might think you had a normal childhood because everyone got fed and went to school. But normal does not mean healthy. Normal might have meant your feelings were dismissed, your boundaries were crossed regularly, or you learned that other people's needs always came first. Understanding these roots changes everything. Your people-pleasing is not a character flaw. It is evidence of how adaptable you were as a child. Part 3. The hidden cost of keeping everyone happy. The physical warning signs usually come first, but most people ignore them completely. Sarah looked successful to everyone around her. Promotion after promotion, countless volunteer commitments, always the first person friends called during a crisis. Her calendar stayed packed from dawn until midnight. Yet she found herself crying in grocery store parking lots for reasons she could not explain. Her body was sending signals she had learned to silence. The tension headaches that started Monday morning and lasted through Friday. The stomach problems that 3 different doctors could not diagnose. The exhaustion that sleep never seemed to fix. When Dr. Jennifer Freed studied chronic people-pleasers, she found they were 40% more likely to develop autoimmune disorders and twice as likely to experience depression. The emotional toll runs even deeper than the physical symptoms. Living without boundaries creates a constant state of internal conflict. Part of you wants to help everyone, while another part screams that you cannot take on one more thing. This internal war produces anxiety that never fully goes away. You might feel calm on the surface, but underneath lies a persistent worry about disappointing someone. Resentment grows like a poison in relationships where boundaries do not exist. You give and give until you feel empty, then wonder why nobody appreciates your sacrifices. The brutal truth is that people-pleasers often create the very rejection they fear. When you never say no, your yes becomes meaningless. When you never express your real opinions, people stop asking what you think. The identity crisis hits hardest of all. After years of focusing on what everyone else needs, you lose touch with your own desires. You might sit in restaurants, unable to decide what to order because you have spent so long asking others what they prefer. You become a master at reading rooms and adjusting your personality accordingly, but you forget who you are when nobody else is watching. Dr. Melody Beattie's research on codependency revealed that people without boundaries often attract relationships with takers. These relationships become transactional. You give your time, energy, and resources while receiving crumbs of approval in return. The people who love you most might actually prefer your authentic self, but they never get to meet that person. The breaking point comes differently for everyone. Sometimes it is a panic attack in the middle of a meeting. Sometimes it is the realization that your children are learning to disappear the same way you did. Sometimes it is looking in the mirror and recognizing that the person staring back is a stranger you created to keep everyone else comfortable. Part 4. The moment you realize something has to change. The wake-up call rarely arrives with fanfare. For Sarah, a marketing director at a tech startup, it came on an ordinary Wednesday morning when she found herself sobbing in her car after agreeing to cover a coworker's weekend shift. Again. She had promised her daughter they would finally finish the puzzle they started 3 months ago, but now she would spend Saturday in an empty office instead. That moment in the parking lot, watching her reflection in the rearview mirror, she whispered the words that changed everything. "I hate who I have become." These breaking points look different for everyone, but they share a common thread. Dr. Harriet Braker documented hundreds of such moments in her research on people-pleasing patterns. There is the mother who realizes she has been so busy meeting everyone else's needs that her own children barely know her. The employee who discovers his chronic back pain disappears during vacation, but returns within hours of checking work emails. The friend who finally admits she dreads social gatherings because they have become performances where she must be everything to everyone. Sometimes, the moment arrives as physical collapse. Your body keeps the score when your mind refuses to acknowledge the damage. Therapist Nedra Tawwab describes clients who develop mysterious illnesses, chronic fatigue, or anxiety disorders that doctors struggle to treat because the root cause is not medical but relational. When you consistently ignore your own limits, your body eventually enforces them for you. Other times, it is pure emotional exhaustion. You find yourself snapping at people you love, feeling resentful toward those you help most, or experiencing what psychologists call compassion fatigue, the point where caring for others becomes impossible because you have nothing left to give. This is not selfishness. This is depletion. The most painful awakenings involve recognizing how your patterns have damaged the relationships you were trying to protect. Dr. Lindsay Gibson's work with emotionally immature family systems shows how children who learn to manage their parents' emotions often become adults who cannot stop managing everyone else's emotions. The very behavior meant to keep people close pushes them away because authentic connection requires authentic presence. Perhaps the most profound moment comes when you realize you have no idea who you are outside of what you do for others. If you stopped rescuing, helping, and accommodating, what would remain? This question terrifies many people because the answer feels like nothing. But here is what the breaking point actually represents. Not destruction, but recognition. You are finally seeing clearly what has been happening all along. The exhaustion you feel is not weakness. It is your inner wisdom trying to get your attention. Change becomes possible when the pain of staying the same exceeds the fear of being different. Chapter 2. Drawing Lines in the Sand. Part 1. Boundaries are not walls. When Dr. Sarah Warren realized her garden fence wasn't keeping deer out, but protecting her tomatoes within, she discovered what boundaries really do. Most people think boundaries are about keeping others away. This couldn't be further from the truth. When Warren, a relationship therapist in Portland, started setting limits with her demanding mother, her fear was that mom would stop calling altogether. Instead, something remarkable happened. Their conversations became deeper, more honest, and far more enjoyable. Warren had confused walls with boundaries. Walls are built from fear and shut everything out. They say, "Stay away from me completely." Boundaries are built from self-respect and let the right things in. They say, "You can come close, but here's how we interact in healthy ways." Think about your garden fence. It doesn't exist to keep the world out. It protects what's growing inside, while still allowing sunshine, rain, and visitors through the gate. Similarly, personal boundaries protect your well-being while maintaining connection with others. Research from the Gottman Institute shows that couples with clear boundaries report 40% higher relationship satisfaction. Why? Because boundaries create clarity. When your partner knows you need an hour to decompress after work, they stop taking your silence personally. When your colleague understands you don't check emails after 7 p.m., they respect your time instead of resenting your delayed responses. Without boundaries, love becomes suffocating closeness. Generosity turns into exhausting martyrdom. Kindness becomes people-pleasing that breeds resentment on both sides. Consider the story of Maria Santos, who worked 80-hour weeks covering for lazy coworkers. She believed saying no would make her seem selfish. Instead, her constant availability enabled others' poor performance while destroying her own health. When Maria finally started declining non-urgent requests, two things happened. Her work quality improved dramatically, and surprisingly, her colleagues began respecting her more, not less. The fear that boundaries will drive people away reveals something important. Those who leave when you set healthy limits were only there for what you could provide, not who you are. Real relationships grow stronger with boundaries because both people feel safe to be authentic. Setting boundaries isn't cruel or selfish. It's the kindest thing you can do for yourself and others because it allows genuine connection instead of resentful obligation. Part 2. The 6 places you need fences. Think of your life as a house with 6 rooms that each need their own security system. Most people leave some rooms completely unguarded while overprotecting others. This creates chaos where boundary violations in one area cascade into every other part of your life. Sarah learned this the hard way when her coworker began texting her at 11 p.m. about non-urgent projects. What started as poor time boundaries quickly drained her energy, made her snappy with her family, and left her feeling invaded even in her own bedroom. When Microsoft implemented strict email policies to prevent after-hours contact in 2019, employee stress levels dropped by 32% within 3 months. Your personal life needs the same intentional protection. Time boundaries mean your schedule belongs to you, not whoever asks loudest. When someone says, "This will only take 5 minutes," you can respond with, "I have 5 minutes available Thursday at 2 p.m. Notice how this acknowledges their need while protecting your time. People who respect you will work within your availability. Those who don't will reveal themselves quickly. Energy boundaries require recognizing that your capacity is finite, like a phone battery. Netflix executive Reed Hastings famously guards his energy by taking walking meetings and declining social events during busy periods. You might need to stop being the person everyone calls to vent, especially if you leave those conversations feeling exhausted. A simple, "I care about you, but I'm not in a good headspace to listen right now," protects both of you. Emotional boundaries mean you can care without carrying someone else's feelings. When your friend complains about their job for the 100th time, you don't need to feel their frustration as your own anxiety. Dr. Brené Brown calls this compassionate boundaries, staying present without becoming emotionally hijacked. Physical boundaries govern who touches you and when. This includes unwanted hugs, invasion of personal space, and obviously, more serious violations. Even something as simple as "I'm not a hugger, but I'm happy to see you," establishes your sovereignty over your own body. Financial boundaries prevent money from becoming a weapon others use against you. Warren Buffett's children learned early that family money came with clear limits and expectations. You can love someone deeply and still decline to lend them money, especially if they have a history of not repaying debts or using guilt to manipulate your generosity. Space boundaries protect your environments, both physical and digital. This means having areas where you feel completely safe and respected. It might mean keeping your bedroom device-free, limiting who has keys to your home, or curating your social media feeds to exclude people who consistently drain your peace. Here's what most people miss. These 6 areas are completely interconnected. Poor time boundaries drain your energy. Low energy weakens your emotional resilience. Emotional exhaustion makes you vulnerable to financial manipulation. Each breach creates cracks that spread throughout your entire boundary system. Right now, mentally walk through each area. Where do you feel most violated? That's probably where you need to start building your first fence. Part 3. Your Boundary Blueprint. Sarah grew up watching her mother take on everyone else's problems while never asking for help herself. When neighbors needed babysitting, groceries, or emotional support, her mother said yes automatically. Sarah learned that good people sacrifice themselves, that saying no makes you selfish, and that your needs always come last. By 35, Sarah found herself drowning in commitments she never wanted, helping people who never reciprocated, and feeling guilty every time she considered putting herself first. This invisible rulebook Sarah inherited isn't unique. Every person walks through life carrying an unconscious boundary blueprint, a set of unspoken rules about what they can ask for, what they must endure, and what they deserve. These blueprints get written early and powerfully. Think about Dr. Maya Angelou, who wrote extensively about how her childhood abuse shaped her boundaries around trust and vulnerability. Or consider tennis champion Serena Williams, who had to learn to set boundaries with media and fans despite growing up in a family where saying no wasn't encouraged. Your blueprint might tell you that anger is dangerous, that needs burden others, or that love requires earning through perfect performance. Gender plays a huge role in blueprint formation. Research from Northwestern University shows women receive different boundary training from birth, praised for compliance and caretaking, while boys get encouraged to assert themselves. Firstborn children often develop blueprints centered on responsibility and control. Youngest children might struggle with being taken seriously. Children of immigrants frequently inherit blueprints where family needs always supersede personal boundaries. Cultural therapist Dr. Janet Helms found that people from collectivist cultures often struggle with individual boundaries because community harmony was prioritized over personal limits. Meanwhile, those from chaotic households might develop hyper-rigid boundaries or none at all. Your blueprint reveals itself through patterns. Notice what you always tolerate. Maybe it's last-minute work requests or friends who only call when they need something. Pay attention to requests you automatically accept even when your schedule is full. Watch which emotions you consistently swallow rather than express. Lisa, a client of boundary expert Terry Cole, realized her blueprint contained the rule, never inconvenience anyone. This led to her working late constantly, never asking for help with household tasks, and apologizing for basic needs. Recognition of this pattern became her starting point for change. The blueprint isn't your fault, but redesigning it is your responsibility. Awareness transforms unconscious reactions into conscious choices. Part 4. The Guilt Monster and Why It Lies to You. The moment you try to say no to someone, a familiar voice starts screaming in your head. This voice sounds reasonable. It sounds concerned. It tells you that you are being selfish, that good people do not act this way, that someone will be hurt if you do not give in. Dr. Harriet Breaker calls this the disease to please, but think of it as the guilt monster. This creature lives in your mind and shows up every single time you try to put yourself first. The guilt monster is not your friend. It masquerades as your conscience, but it is actually the echo of old programming. Maybe your mother always said you were such a good helper. Maybe your father praised you only when you sacrificed for others. Maybe your family operated on the unspoken rule that love equals service and needs equal selfishness. Here is what therapist Nedra Glover Tawwab discovered in her practice. The guilt you feel after setting a boundary is not evidence that you did something wrong. It is evidence that you did something new. Your nervous system has been trained to expect compliance. When you break that pattern, alarms go off. The discomfort is not moral guidance. It is habit disruption. Consider Sarah, a marketing manager who finally told her boss she would not answer emails after 8 p.m. The guilt hit her like a truck. She spent the entire evening convinced she was lazy and unprofessional. But her boss simply said, "Okay," and started planning better. The guilt was not prophetic. It was just loud. Psychologist Dr. Aziz Gazipura distinguishes between healthy guilt and toxic guilt. Healthy guilt appears when you genuinely harm someone or violate your values. Toxic guilt punishes you for having needs, setting limits, or existing on your own terms. Toxic guilt tells you that disappointing someone is the same as hurting them. It is not. When guilt strikes, try this approach from Melody Beattie's work with codependency. Name it, question it, breathe through it. Say out loud, "I notice I am feeling guilty for setting this boundary." Then ask, did I actually harm anyone, or did I just stop overgiving? Finally, breathe deeply and remind yourself why this boundary matters. The guilt will pass. Chapter 3. Finding Your Voice. Part 1. The Art of Saying No Without Apologizing. Most people think saying no is a skill. Here's the truth. It's actually an emotional regulation practice. Your body will betray you the first time you try to say no without an excuse. Sarah, a marketing director, discovered this when she told her boss she couldn't work Saturday. Her heart pounded like she'd run a marathon. Her palms started sweating. Her mouth went dry. She felt so uncomfortable that she immediately added, "Unless it's really important. I mean, I could probably figure something out if you really need me." This is the over-explaining trap. When we feel guilty about saying no, we try to soften the blow with elaborate justifications. But here's what happens. Every excuse becomes a negotiation point. When Sarah explained she had plans with her sister, her boss suggested rescheduling. When she mentioned being tired, he offered to let her start later. Each explanation gave him ammunition to argue with her boundary. Dr. Aziz Gazipura found in his research that people-pleasers add an average of 3 unnecessary explanations to every no. This pattern transforms a simple boundary into a debate. The person requesting something hears your excuses as obstacles to overcome rather than a final decision to respect. Consider how children accept the word no. A toddler might not like hearing no about cookies before dinner, but they understand it's complete information. Adults have learned to expect elaborate explanations, but that doesn't mean we're required to provide them. The physical discomfort you feel when saying no without justification isn't dangerous. It's your nervous system processing the unfamiliar experience of disappointing someone intentionally. Therapist Nedra Tawwab compares it to exercising a muscle that's been dormant for years. The burn means it's working. Marcus, a software engineer, practiced saying no to his mother's guilt trips about visiting more often. His first attempt was clumsy. "I can't come this weekend, Mom. I'm exhausted, work has been crazy, and I promised Jennifer we'd finally organize the garage." His mother pounced on each excuse. The second time, he simply said, "That won't work for me, but I'd love to plan something for next month." The conversation ended in 30 seconds instead of 30 minutes. The difference between assertiveness and aggression lies in your intention. Assertiveness protects your well-being. Aggression seeks to punish the other person. Your tone should be warm but unmovable, like a kind teacher who won't change the deadline no matter how creative your excuse becomes. Part 2. Scripts for the hardest conversations. The hardest conversations happen when we already know what we need to say, but our voice disappears the moment we need it most. Sarah had practiced telling her sister to stop dropping by unannounced 15 times in her bathroom mirror. When her sister actually showed up at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, Sarah opened the door and said, "Come in, I was just making tea." The problem is not knowing what healthy boundaries look like. The problem is finding words that sound like you when your heart is racing and your people-pleasing alarm is screaming at full volume. Real boundary conversations require scripts that fit your mouth, not templates from a therapy book. When Michael finally told his mother she could not criticize his wife anymore, he did not say, "I'm setting a boundary around your comments about Linda." He said, "Mom, I love you, but I need you to stop making remarks about Linda's cooking and housekeeping. It hurts our relationship." The magic happens when your boundaries sound conversational instead of clinical. Think about how you talk to your best friend when you disagree about something small. You are direct, but not mean. You are clear, but not cold. That same tone works for bigger conversations too. Timing changes everything about how your words land. Jenny learned this when she tried to address her boss's constant after-hours texts during a stressful project deadline. Her boss dismissed her completely. 3 weeks later, when things calmed down, she said, "I want to talk about managing communication outside office hours so I can give you my best work during the day." Same message, different result. Your voice will shake the first few times. That is normal. Rachel's hands trembled when she told her friend, "I can't be your therapist every day anymore. I care about you, but these calls are affecting my sleep and my family time." Her friend was hurt initially, but later thanked her for being honest instead of slowly pulling away. The fear that someone will never speak to you again feels enormous until you realize that people who truly love you want to know how to treat you better. Those who get angry and stay angry were probably taking advantage of your silence anyway. Practice these conversations when you are calm. Record yourself saying the words out loud. Notice where you apologize unnecessarily or add explanations that weaken your message. Your first draft always contains too many words. Your second draft sounds like you. Part 3. When they push back, and they will. Remember that moment when you finally drew a line in the sand. The pushback started within hours. This reaction tells you everything you need to know about why the boundary was necessary in the first place. When Netflix's Reed Hastings announced the company would no longer offer both DVD and streaming services for one low price in 2011, customers erupted. They canceled subscriptions in droves. They wrote angry letters. They created online petitions. Hastings later called it the most difficult period in Netflix's history. But he held firm. Today, Netflix dominates streaming precisely because they maintained boundaries around their business model despite intense pressure. Your personal boundaries will face similar resistance. The people who benefited from your endless availability, your inability to say no, or your tendency to absorb their problems will not celebrate your newfound limits. They cannot. Their comfort depended on your discomfort. The tactics are predictable. First comes guilt. Your sister might say you are being selfish for not watching her kids every weekend. Your boss might mention how the team is counting on you to work late again. Your friend might remind you of all the times she was there for you. Notice how these statements focus on your character rather than addressing the actual boundary. Next comes anger. Raised voices, slammed doors, accusations that you have become cold or distant. This anger is not about you. It is about the fear of losing access to something they took for granted. When your coworker realizes you will no longer cover his responsibilities, his frustration reveals how much he relied on your overgiving. The silent treatment follows. Days or weeks of cold shoulders, brief responses, or complete avoidance. This tactic banks on your discomfort with conflict. Many people cave here, apologizing for boundaries they should not apologize for, just to restore peace. Some people recruit allies. Suddenly, mutual friends express concern about your new attitude. Family members ask if everything is okay at home. These flying monkeys, as psychologists call them, often have good intentions, but incomplete information. The most painful response is the "you have changed" accusation. Yes, you have changed. You stopped accepting treatment that was never acceptable. You stopped saying yes when you meant no. You stopped lighting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Dr. Nedra Tawwab, a licensed therapist who specializes in boundary work, calls this the boundary tax. You pay upfront emotional discomfort for long-term peace and authentic relationships. Like any investment, the early stages feel expensive. Consider Sarah, a marketing director who stopped answering work emails after 7 p.m. Her team initially complained about delayed responses. Her manager questioned her commitment. But within 6 weeks, her colleagues learned to plan better and communicate during business hours. Her productivity during work hours actually improved because she was well-rested and focused. The key is distinguishing between genuine hurt and manipulation. Someone who is genuinely hurt will express their feelings and remain open to dialogue. They might say, "I felt rejected when you said no to dinner. Can we talk about it?" A manipulator attacks your character or withdraws completely until you bend. During pushback, resist the urge to justify, argue, defend, or explain repeatedly. Your boundary is not a negotiation. It is information about how you will engage moving forward. State it once clearly, then demonstrate it consistently through your actions. The relationships that survive your boundaries become stronger. The ones that do not were probably costing you more than they were worth. Part 4. Boundaries at work, at home, and online. Your boundary battles will look completely different depending on where you fight them. And each battlefield requires its own strategy. At work, the pressure to say yes feels relentless. When your boss asks you to stay late again, your instinct might be to automatically agree. But consider Sarah, a marketing manager who worked 70-hour weeks for 3 years straight. She thought being indispensable meant never refusing anything. When she finally burned out and took medical leave, her projects continued just fine without her. The company survived. She realized she had been martyring herself for nothing. The workplace guilt runs deep because we confuse boundaries with laziness. When you decline extra projects, you might worry colleagues will think you lack commitment. This fear keeps millions of people trapped in cycles of overwork. The truth is simpler than we make it. Saying no to one thing means saying yes to something else. When you protect your energy for core responsibilities, you actually perform better. Your home should be your refuge, but family boundaries cut the deepest. When your mother criticizes your parenting for the 100th time, standing up feels like betrayal. When your partner expects you to handle all household planning, pushing back seems selfish. The emotional stakes feel impossibly high because these relationships matter most. Tom learned this when his adult son kept asking for money. Each request came with stories about emergencies and promises to pay back. Tom said yes repeatedly until he drained his retirement savings. Finally, he set a boundary: no more loans. His son accused him of not caring. The guilt was crushing, but Tom held steady. 6 months later, his son found steady work, and their relationship improved without the financial tension. The digital world presents the newest boundary challenges. Your phone buzzes with work emails at 9 p.m. Social media notifications demand constant attention. Group chats explode with messages that feel urgent, but rarely are. The expectation of immediate response has created a culture of digital servitude. Jessica, a freelance designer, discovered this when clients began expecting her to answer messages within minutes, day or night. She started turning off notifications after 6 p.m. and responding to non-emergency messages the next business day. Initially, some clients complained, but her work quality improved dramatically when she could focus without constant interruption. The clients who respected her boundaries became her best long-term partnerships. Each environment requires different approaches because the relationships and power dynamics vary. Your boundary with your boss might be diplomatic but firm. Your boundary with your spouse might be more direct and vulnerable. Your digital boundaries might be automatic settings that protect you from yourself. The key is recognizing that boundaries are not selfish walls you build to keep people out. They are bridges that help relationships function better by clarifying expectations on both sides. Chapter 4: The Messy Middle, Part 1. The people who will not like the new you. When you start saying no to the person who always expects yes, prepare for their confusion. Sarah learned this lesson when she stopped working weekends for her demanding boss. After 3 years of sacrificing family dinners and soccer games, she finally drew the line. Her boss's response was swift and cold. "You've changed," he said during their next meeting, his tone carrying disappointment and accusation. He was right. She had changed. The question was whether that change was a problem or a solution. Research from Dr. Henry Cloud shows that relationships built on imbalance cannot survive when one person starts seeking equality. Think about it like a seesaw. When you've been the person sitting low, carrying all the weight, what happens when you finally ask the other person to carry their share? The seesaw shifts, sometimes dramatically. Michael discovered this when he stopped lending money to his brother every month. For years, he had been the family ATM, never saying no to requests that ranged from rent money to vacation funds. When he finally said, "I can't keep doing this," his brother accused him of being selfish and abandoning family. Their relationship became strained. Family gatherings grew uncomfortable. The truth is that some people were not attracted to your friendship or your company. They were attracted to your compliance. When compliance ends, so does their interest. This realization stings, but it also clarifies who truly values you versus who simply values what you provide. Dr. Nedra Tawwab explains that healthy relationships require two people who can both give and receive. When you stop being the person who only gives, relationships naturally reorganize themselves. Some will deepen, others will fade. This reorganization feels like loss, but it's actually clarity. Jennifer experienced both sides of this reality. When she stopped volunteering for every PTA committee and started saying no to weekend social events that drained her, 2 friends stopped calling. But 3 other friendships grew stronger. Those 3 friends respected her honesty and began sharing their own struggles with boundaries. The relationships became more authentic because both people could finally show up as themselves. You are not losing people when you set boundaries. You are losing roles. The role of the person who always says yes, the role of the emotional dumping ground, the role of the rescuer who fixes everyone's problems. These roles felt important because they made you needed, but they also made you exhausted. The temporary loneliness that follows boundary setting is real and normal. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. Part 2. Grief, guilt, and growing pains. That space between who you were and who you're becoming is where everything hurts at once. You might think boundary setting should feel empowering from day one, but the truth is messier. Most people describe it as feeling like they're swimming against a current they didn't know existed. Sarah, a marketing manager in Chicago, set her first real boundary with her boss on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she was crying in her car, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. "I felt like I'd kicked a puppy," she told me later. "My boss looked genuinely hurt when I said I couldn't work the weekend, and I spent 3 days convinced I was a horrible person." This is what therapists call boundary guilt, and it hits almost everyone. Your brain, wired for decades to prioritize other people's comfort over your own well-being, starts sending alarm signals. You might feel selfish, mean, or ungrateful. These feelings are not evidence that you're doing something wrong. They're evidence that you're doing something new. The grief comes next. You're mourning the version of yourself who made everyone happy, even when it destroyed you. That person felt needed, important, maybe even heroic. Now you're watching relationships shift, and some people pull away. It feels like loss because it is loss. Marcus, a social worker from Detroit, described it perfectly. "I grieved the guy who never said no, like he was a real person who died. I actually missed him, even though he was killing me." Then comes the boundary hangover. After you've had that difficult conversation or said no to something big, your body crashes. You might feel emotionally drained, physically exhausted, or strangely empty. This isn't weakness. Your nervous system just worked overtime, doing something it's never done before. Recovery looks different for everyone. Some people need to sleep for 12 hours. Others need to call a friend who gets it. Many need to remind themselves, sometimes out loud, that their feelings matter too. The hardest part is that growth isn't linear. You'll set a boundary on Monday and break it by Wednesday. You'll have 3 good weeks, followed by a complete backslide. This doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. The old patterns feel like a warm blanket on a cold day. They're familiar, predictable, and everyone knows their role. But comfort and health aren't the same thing. That warm blanket might be made of asbestos. Part 3. Rewriting relationships that matter. When Dr. Sarah's marriage counselor asked her to tell her husband about her new need for personal time each evening, she felt like she was about to betray 15 years of partnership. Sarah had always been the one who handled everything after work, while her husband relaxed. But after months of building internal boundaries, she knew this conversation was necessary. The talk didn't go as planned. Her husband felt blindsided and defensive. He accused her of becoming selfish and changing the rules without warning. Sarah's first instinct was to backtrack and apologize. Instead, she took a breath and said something that surprised them both. "I can see how this feels sudden to you. I should have talked to you sooner about how overwhelmed I've been feeling." This response changed everything. Instead of making her husband the villain in her growth story, she invited him into it. She explained that she hadn't been honest about her needs because she was afraid of disappointing him. She acknowledged that her silence had created an unfair dynamic where he didn't even know she was struggling. The conversation that followed wasn't easy, but it was honest. Her husband admitted he had noticed her growing resentment but didn't know how to address it. Together, they redesigned their evening routine. He started cooking dinner twice a week. She got her hour of alone time. Their marriage didn't just survive her new boundaries. It became more balanced than it had been in years. Not every relationship conversation will be this successful. Some people will resist your changes, no matter how thoughtfully you approach them. But many relationships can be rebuilt, if you're willing to own your part in creating the original dynamic. The key is taking responsibility without taking blame. Sarah didn't apologize for needing personal time. She apologized for not communicating her needs clearly. She didn't blame her husband for expecting her to handle everything. She acknowledged that her silence had taught him to expect it. When you've been the person who always says yes, your sudden no can feel like a betrayal to others. They're not necessarily being manipulative. They might genuinely be confused. The person they thought they knew is acting differently, and they don't understand why. Maya found this when she stopped automatically agreeing to host every family gathering. Her sister was hurt and angry, accusing Maya of becoming too good for the family. Instead of defending herself, Maya said, "I love our family time. I'm hoping we can figure out a way to share the hosting so I can enjoy the gatherings instead of being too stressed to participate." This reframe helped her sister see that Maya's boundary wasn't about rejecting the family. It was about showing up more fully for them. Part 4. When to hold the line and when to bend. Sarah learned this the hard way when her mother called asking for money to pay rent. For 3 years, Sarah had maintained a boundary about lending money to her mom, who had a pattern of not paying it back. But this wasn't about a shopping spree or vacation. This was about keeping a roof over her head. The old Sarah would have either automatically said yes or automatically said no, then felt terrible either way. The new Sarah paused. She asked herself the questions her therapist had taught her. Is this a genuine emergency? Will helping solve the actual problem or just delay it? Can I afford this emotionally and financially? This is where boundary work gets complicated. Real life doesn't come with clear-cut rules. Sometimes holding the line feels cruel. Sometimes bending feels stupid. The key is learning to tell the difference between flexibility and falling back into old patterns. Dr. Nedra Tawwab calls this discerning flexibility. When her clients struggle with this, she asks them to notice their body's response. Healthy flexibility feels calm, even if it's difficult. You're making a conscious choice from a place of strength. Unhealthy bending feels panicky and resentful. You're reacting from fear or guilt. For Sarah, lending her mom money this one time felt different. She wasn't doing it to avoid conflict or because she felt guilty. She was doing it because she genuinely wanted to help, and she had a specific plan. She told her mother, "I can help with half the rent this month. Let's also talk about resources that might help you avoid this situation again." Boundary fatigue is real. Maya, who had successfully stopped hosting every family gathering, found herself exhausted by the constant mental calculations. Should I say yes to this? What about this? She was turning every request into a major decision. Her solution was creating what she called easy boundaries. These were non-negotiable limits that didn't require daily deliberation. No phone calls after 9 p.m. No work emails on weekends. No lending her car. These became automatic, freeing up mental energy for situations that actually needed careful consideration. The perfectionism trap catches many people. They set a boundary, break it once, then decide they're failures at the whole thing. Melissa Urban reminds us that boundaries are skills, not moral imperatives. You don't throw away your violin because you hit a wrong note. Tom experienced this when he agreed to work late after promising himself he wouldn't. Instead of abandoning his boundary entirely, he used it as information. What made him say yes? How could he handle it differently next time? He realized he needed to practice saying, "Let me check my schedule and get back to you." The difference between protection and isolation often comes down to intention. Are you setting this boundary to create space for what you value, or are you building walls to avoid all discomfort? Healthy boundaries are doors with handles on both sides. You can open them when you choose to. Chapter 5. Life on the Other Side, Part 1. From Surviving to Choosing. The moment Sarah realized she had been living someone else's life came on a Tuesday morning when her alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. Instead of the familiar dread that usually washed over her, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed: anticipation. After 18 months of building boundaries, she was waking up to her own choices for the first time in decades. This shift from surviving to choosing happens gradually, then all at once. Maya Angelou once described a similar awakening in her own life, saying she finally stopped asking permission to exist in her own skin. For people who have spent years accommodating everyone else's needs, the transition feels like stepping out of a cramped room they didn't realize they were in. Dr. Terry Cole, who has worked with thousands of clients struggling with boundaries, describes this phase as moving from reaction to response. When Netflix CEO Reed Hastings implemented strict boundaries around his schedule, declining most meetings that didn't directly impact company strategy, his team initially panicked. 6 months later, they reported feeling more empowered to make decisions without constantly seeking approval. Hastings had created what psychologists call emotional margin, the breathing room that appears when you stop managing everyone else's feelings. This margin manifests in surprisingly concrete ways. You check your phone without that familiar knot in your stomach. Weekend plans become about what energizes you, not what you feel obligated to do. Dr. Nedra Tawwab shares stories of clients who rediscovered forgotten passions once they stopped overcommitting. One woman started painting again after 20 years. Another began cooking elaborate meals just because he enjoyed it, not because anyone expected it. The relationship with sleep changes too. When Oprah Winfrey began saying no to commitments that drained her, she described finally sleeping through the night without that underlying anxiety that had been her constant companion. Sleep becomes restoration rather than temporary escape from overwhelming responsibilities. Perhaps most remarkably, your capacity for genuine connection expands. Psychologist Dr. John Gottman's research shows that relationships actually strengthen when both people have healthy boundaries. You stop showing up as a depleted version of yourself, which allows others to meet the real you. The irony is profound. Protecting yourself makes you more available to others, not less. This emotional margin creates space for spontaneity. When author Brené Brown stopped scheduling every weekend to avoid disappointing others, she discovered she could be present for unexpected moments with her children. The mental energy previously spent calculating other people's reactions became available for creativity, rest, and joy. The transformation feels like waking up from a long sleep, suddenly seeing colors that were always there, but somehow invisible before. Part 2. Teaching boundaries to the next generation. Creating this shift in the next generation starts earlier than most people think. Research from child development specialists shows that boundary education begins before children can even speak. When 18-month-old Maya pushes away a hug, her grandmother used to say, "Don't be rude, give grandma a hug." But Maya's mother, who grew up feeling like her body wasn't her own, made a different choice. "Maya doesn't want to hug right now, and that's okay," she said instead. This simple moment taught Maya something profound. Her no matters. The work looks different at every age, but it always starts with modeling. Children learn boundaries by watching adults set them. Dr. Terry Cole's research on boundary blueprints reveals that most of our patterns form by age 7. When children see a parent calmly say, "I can't talk right now because it's family dinner time," they learn that protecting time is normal. When they watch a parent decline an invitation without elaborate excuses, they see that no is a complete sentence. Teaching body autonomy starts with the smallest choices. Instead of forcing hugs or kisses, parents who break the cycle ask, "Would you like to give Uncle Joe a hug, a high five, or just wave goodbye?" They respect when children say no to tickling. They knock before entering bedrooms. These micro moments build a foundation that protects children from much larger violations later. The teenage years require different tools. Sarah Chen, a high school counselor, shares how boundary education helped one student handle peer pressure differently than she ever could have. When friends pressured 16-year-old Alex to share homework answers, He remembered his mother's words, "You can be kind without being convenient." He offered to study together instead of sharing answers directly. The friendship survived, and Alex learned he could help without compromising his values. Cultural context matters enormously in this work. In many families, questioning authority feels dangerous. Parents from hierarchical cultures often worry that teaching boundaries will create disrespectful children. A boundary education actually teaches respect for themselves and others. Children who learn to communicate their needs respectfully are more likely to honor others' boundaries too. The workplace preparation starts young. When 22-year-old James entered his first corporate job, he already knew how to handle unreasonable demands because his parents had taught him the difference between being helpful and being exploited. His manager's request to work weekends without compensation felt familiar, not because he'd experienced it, but because he'd learned to recognize it. Breaking generational patterns takes intentional effort. Parents who grew up in people-pleasing families must consciously choose different responses. When their child says no to cleaning their room, instead of the automatic shame-inducing response they received, they might say, "I hear that you don't want to clean right now. Let's talk about when you will do it instead." This revolution happens quietly at dinner tables and bedtime conversations. Imagine a world where the next generation learns boundaries as naturally as they learn to tie their shoes, where saying no doesn't require a book or therapy because it was modeled from the beginning. Part 3. The Quiet Power of a Protected Life. Here's the continuation. Sarah describes her boundaried life as stepping into a warm library after years of standing in a howling storm. The noise is gone. The chaos that once felt normal now seems like a distant memory she's grateful to have left behind. When you protect your time, something magical happens. Instead of rushing from obligation to obligation, you rediscover parts of yourself that got buried under everyone else's needs. Mark, a software engineer who learned to say no to weekend work calls, suddenly remembered he loved painting. He hadn't touched a brush in 15 years. Now his apartment walls display watercolors he creates during the quiet Saturday mornings he guards fiercely. This isn't about becoming selfish, it's about becoming selective. When you stop giving your energy to every request, you have more to offer the people and causes that truly matter. Lisa used to volunteer for every school committee, feeling drained and resentful. After stepping back from 3 committees, she poured herself into mentoring one struggling student. That single relationship transformed both their lives in ways her scattered previous efforts never could. Protected emotions create an inner stillness that surprises people. When your self-worth doesn't depend on making everyone happy, external drama loses its power to derail you. Your coworker's passive-aggressive email becomes just an email, not a crisis requiring immediate emotional labor. The relative who always pushes your buttons finds their tactics don't work anymore because you've stopped participating in their drama. People notice this shift. They start asking what's different about you. Some initially resist your new boundaries, testing them like children testing bedtime rules. But eventually, most people respect what they see. They watch you living intentionally and quietly give themselves permission to do the same. This quiet power isn't dramatic or Instagram-worthy. It's the profound peace of knowing you're living your own life instead of reacting to everyone else's. It's waking up on Sunday morning and asking yourself what you actually want to do, then doing it. It's the sacred act of treating yourself as someone worthy of protection, care, and respect. Your boundaried life becomes a sanctuary you've built one careful decision at a time. Part 4. A letter to your future self. A letter to your future self. Think about the person you were 6 months ago. Then imagine having a conversation with who you'll become 6 months from now. Dr. Terry Cole worked with a client who kept a boundary victory journal during her recovery from chronic people-pleasing. Sarah, a marketing executive, started writing letters to her future self every month, documenting the small wins and the setbacks. When she reviewed these letters a year later, She was amazed at how much had shifted without her realizing it. Writing to your future self creates something powerful. It forces you to get honest about where you are and where you want to go. More importantly, it becomes your personal reminder on hard days when the old patterns feel easier than the new ones. Start with this question. What boundaries have you set that you're most proud of? Maybe it's saying no to weekend work calls, or telling your mother you won't discuss your dating life anymore, or walking away from friendships that only existed when people needed something from you. Write about how these decisions felt in the moment and how they feel now. Think about the relationships that have changed. Some people probably got angry when you stopped being available 24/7. Others might have stepped up and become better friends. Melody Beattie observed that when we stop enabling others, we discover who was actually interested in a healthy relationship versus who just wanted us to stay small and convenient. Describe your daily life now. What does your morning feel like when you're not immediately checking messages to see who needs you? How do your weekends look when you plan them around what you actually want to do? Dr. Aziz Gazipura's research shows that people who recover from people-pleasing often rediscover interests and passions they abandoned years ago while trying to be everything to everyone. Write to that person who first picked up this book. What would you tell them about the journey ahead? That it gets easier, but not in the way they think. The boundary setting itself becomes more natural, but you'll always need to stay awake to old patterns trying to creep back in. Manuel Smith emphasized that boundaries aren't a one-time achievement. They're a daily practice of choosing yourself over and over again. Some days that choice feels heroic. Other days, it's as simple as not answering a text immediately because you're having dinner. Your letter becomes your lighthouse on foggy days, when doubt whispers that maybe you were better off before, when people liked you more, when life felt simpler. Read it then. Remember that simple isn't always healthy, and being liked for pretending to be someone else isn't actually being liked at all.